Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining our webinar today on AI as a stakeholder. Based on the response we've had to this topic, this will probably actually be the first in a series where we explore the role of AI in communications. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ngaire Crawford. I'm the Director of Research and Insights at Isentia. So I spend a lot of time thinking about information environments, about how narratives form, and what are all of the signals underneath what can be quite a lot of noise. I'm not a communications professional, but I am a researcher of communications, which means that I kind of come to this topic with a slightly different instinct, a little less on, how do we specifically manage this, and a little bit more of, what's actually going on here and why does it matter, which I think is a really important discussion at what is quite a crucial time in AI. And to be really honest, it's a thread that we've been starting to pull on in product development and research at Isentia. And sort of once we started pulling, we very much couldn't stop. So I did what any researcher does when they find a question that they can't answer alone. I found people much, much smarter than me and asked them if we could talk about it. So the fact that you're all here to watch that conversation happen is something I find very delightful, probably a little bit indulgent, but still very delightful none the same. So to have that conversation, we've brought together three people who each approach this from a very different vantage point. So firstly, on our panel today, we have Dr. Nici Sweaney. Nici is a global authority in ethical AI, equity and governance. With 20 years of experience across science and strategy, she has advised more than 75 organisations on responsible AI adoption and upskilled thousands of professionals in practical ethical implementation. She serves as a senior fellow for the AI for Developing Countries Forum and is the founder and CEO of AI Her Way. She's a winner of the Australian AI Awards Female Leader of the Year and a dual category medalist at the Women Changing the World Awards. Nici has delivered more than 200 keynotes and workshops worldwide and has been featured in Forbes Women's Issue 2025 and the Australian Financial Review. Her work is grounded in one belief that when governed well, AI should empower rather than exclude. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nici.
Thank you so much for having me.
We also have Lisa Main joining us today. Lisa specialises in the impact of AI on our information environment and advises organisations on information risk. When generative AI was released, Lisa was invited to co-author a research paper into the impacts of technology on journalism for the Centre of Media Transition at UTS. As a journalist, Lisa played a founding role in the ABC Fact Check and produced award-winning international investigations. Next month, Lisa will be travelling to the UK to participate in the Cambridge University Disinformation Summit. So thank you for joining us, Lisa. And rounding out our panel today, we have one of my personal favourite Isentians, Prashant Saxena. Prashant is the VP of Revenue and Insights for Southeast Asia at Isentia, where he leads multi-market teams advising brands and governments on audience intelligence, narratives and reputation. Under his leadership, his teams have earned more than 20 EMEC awards for excellence in measurement and evaluation. He's a PhD candidate in NTU Singapore, researching authenticity in the AI era and teaches marketing and AI at business schools. PR is a Provoke Media Innovator 25 honoree and a frequent speaker on trust, growth, and the future of AI and communications. So I think you can probably all agree when I said I was going to populate this panel with very, very smart people. I very much nailed that brief. To give you a bit of a lay of the land of the theme we're going to be talking about today, we do often find that particularly in communications, AI is talked about in one of two ways, either as a tool, something you use, your team might have a policy about, something that sits inside your workflow, or as more of a threat, so something that might be a threat to jobs, to trust, and to the integrity of information. Today, we want to really frame that up in a different way and look at AI as a stakeholder. So not metaphorically, but practically. So it is an actor in the information environment that shapes how organisations are perceived, influences what counts as credible, and increasingly mediates the first and sometimes only encounter someone has with your organisation, your leadership, or a specific issue. So when you think about what that actually means, when someone asks an AI system about your organisation, they don't necessarily get a list of sources to weigh up. they get a synthesis. It might be a very confident synthesis, but something that does feel a little bit like a verdict. And it's a verdict that's built from a system that you didn't necessarily brief and you can't always easily interrogate. So that's really the communications reality that we want to talk a little bit about today. It raises questions for not only practitioners, but also how we measure and research in this new environment. And it's a lot of questions that we're all still working through. So we'll be talking through some questions around like what kind of stakeholder is AI? Is it this passive mirror or active narrator? Can you build a relationship with something that you don't fully understand? What happens to local context and local voice and local nuance when the dominant reader of public communications could be a model that's trained on the internet at large? And are we actually becoming better communicators through all of this? Or are we just maybe faster and noisier ones? So with those kind of questions on the table, we will get into it. And if at any stage you want to jump into the conversation, please use the Q&A function in the webinar. If there's anything that we don't get to, the panelists have very graciously agreed to help us follow up with any answers to any of the questions that we and we'll also use those questions to help guide how we might plan out our future sessions. So for my very first question, I am going to go to you, Nici. So I'm really interested in this idea of the personality of AI as a stakeholder. It's sort of there's this implication of trust. Sometimes we ascribe it human characteristics. But if you were going to describe AI as a stakeholder, do you think it's a passive audience or an active shaper of narrative or something else completely
Oh,
different type?
it's a really, really interesting question, right? So I think, I mean, I talk a lot about kind of how we apply these anthropomorphic attributes to AI. And even when I talk about it, I talk about how I have 3 humans working for me and 29 AI agents, and they all have names, right? So I very much have an emotional relationship with AI. But when I think about what it is as a stakeholder, I think it's something in between, something that we haven't quite seen before. So I would describe it almost like an accidental narrator, right? It doesn't really, it's not conscious that what it's doing is shaping our perception of reality or shaping the information that we're exposed to, but that is what it's doing. It's a massive synthesizer. So it's taking heaps of information, it's creating new stories with that information, it's filtering information in and out of it. It's providing analysis, it's providing summaries. And increasingly, that's going to be how people interact with information across the board, which is always in the form of communication, right? So a tool like ChatGPT, it has like 2 billion queries every single, is it day or week? I don't know if my panel can correct me on which timeline, but it's a lot of queries on a really regular basis. And people are taking that narration that gets put towards them as this kind of be all and end all presentation of information. Whereas the AI model itself doesn't understand that that's what it's doing. So when AI models present certain information over others to us, when they show us a particular type of image over others, when they push somebody's agenda over somebody else's, there is no like veiled man behind the curtain, so to speak, that's going, haha, I'm going to trick them with my stakeholder perspective. It's just an algorithm looking at patterns in the data. So yes, it is a stakeholder. It's an accidental one, I would say. And I think it's something that we haven't quite had to interact with before. And in that, it deserves a slightly different nuance into how we approach it and how seriously we take it, I think.
I love that description as a sort of an accidental narrator. It does, in a way, also somehow humanizes it a little bit more as
Oh,
well.
yeah, I probably made it more cuddly.
Actually, to stay on this idea of I guess synthesis and how the black box can sometimes work. Um, Moving a little bit into that information consumption, Lisa, as one of the co-founders of ABC's Fact Check, I'd really love to hear your perspective on how AI is potentially influencing or modifying that notion of facts that I think Nici was touching on a little bit. So we see that an LLM particularly can flatten and condense information, whether it knows that it's doing it or not. But how do you see that being adapted by sort of newsrooms or communications professionals particularly?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think the first thing to say is, off the back of what Nici was saying, is that large language models are not databases of verified facts. So essentially, as I think probably everyone on the call knows, they are kind of algorithms looking for patterns and will kind of predict the next word. That said, I don't know precisely how neural networks actually work. And I know that some of the best academics around the world are trying to get to the bottom of that. And that's an open question right now. But I think there's a couple of things worth drawing out the difference between like a human fact checker and what you're getting through a large language model. And the first thing I'd really talk to is context. So as a fact checker, as a human fact checker, context really matters. So a really easy way to think about that is if I asked everybody on the call what color is a strawberry, we'd all say red, and that would be correct. There is also another answer, which is green, which is also correct when you apply the context of when it's ripening. So context really does matter. The second thing is that facts change over time. And we're seeing this with Iran right now. The facts are changing by the moment. And there are also some other really fast-moving information environments. Just think of financial markets. And we've seen kind of AI cause some havoc in there as well. So, even after the Bondi attack, I left it about a day and a half and I asked ChatGPT, has there ever been a terrorist attack in Bondi? And it came back to me and said, no, there never has been a terrorist attack, which actually brings up another point that I'd like to kind of cover here. And that is that we need to be cognizant of what the large language models are actually looking at. So what the crawlers have access to. And a lot of the news organizations are turning off their crawlers because they're trying to get leverage to get some money out of the AI companies. A couple of news organizations have signed up with deals. So we need to be aware of what access they have to what particular part of information. The other thing, and the most important thing I think I want to cover off, is that the internet at large, which is where the AI crawlers are going through, is an increasingly an adversarial place. I think last year, for the first time, inauthentic bot traffic overtook human traffic. And a lot of that is malicious bot activities. So bots that are designed to kind of seed harmful narratives, accelerate crises, make them look worse than what they are. And we're even seeing, foreign state actors, what they're calling data poisoning now. So Russia trying to influence what the large language model understands as facts. So that's all happening beneath the surface before you get your lovely summary. If you lay on top of that, and this is the kind of last fact I'll leave you with, 3% of Australians can accurately verify or identify manipulated information. So we have this kind of gap of this large language model that is looking at an increasingly polluted and weaponized information system, but our psychology and capability hasn't yet caught up. So I think, just to come to the last bit of your question, there's a real opportunity for newsrooms, if they can survive the economic disruption, to actually be the trusted verification layer of our information systems.
I love the frame of context there. I think one of the challenges we often have in discussions of AI is that we also now have this sort of influx of what is not great data about what's driving them, how models work or don't work, what they're ingesting or not. And I think that's one of the really great things for everyone on this session today, is just to really think about how do you educate yourself in that context, and how do you find all of that additional information, and who you trust as a source about AI, I think is really crucial as well. Prashant, you and I have a lot of experience looking at how to develop sort of measurement and understanding of visibility within an LLM, because it's something that does come up a lot. And we see these questions about GEO or large language model optimization and things that might replace SEO. What do you think from that lens inside of it? What are some of the first steps that you think communications teams should take to consider this style of AI as a stakeholder?
Definitely. So if you look at pre-AI, it was all about influence, which continues, but the influencers were slightly different. So they've had journalists, KOLs came about, and then you had SEO. And that's a layer of influence before people get their information. And now we have this, as Nici said, accidental stakeholder who has entered the room. And this stakeholder is coming with a lot of confidence, pump and show, and is also working with the laziness of the crowd, which is all about we all want quick answers and no one wants to go through reams of pages. So it has created that dynamic, which is quite dangerous and certainly points towards the lack of control. And that's where GEO, AIO, choose your term, comes in. Because at the end of the day, what we are looking at is managing this stakeholder as the stakeholder evolves. So it has not stopped. SEO had stopped. Google had really knowledge graphed everything, but this stakeholder is building and building. So you have a small boy in 2023 who has grown into a man and will come into something else, who knows. So with this kind of persona, let's start to look into what can we do now in 2026. So what we are often doing is we are auditing this. And this is not just one stakeholder. These are councils of stakeholders. It's not ChatGPT only. It's Gemini, it's Perplexity. And we don't know who our audiences are getting information from. Back in the day, it was just Google, manage your SEO, you're done. Who cared about Bing, for example, at that time? But then now you are talking about 5 to 6 different stakeholders, and they continue to fight. For example, a lot of people left ChatGPT because of Iran issues, and they have moved to Claude. Claude is experiencing its own issues. So as we move from stakeholder to stakeholder, which stakeholder do we manage? And that's where the thinking around a council of stakeholder really works. Because if we are looking at AIO from AI perspective, then we can start to think of AI as a council and start to really audit that as a council, which is all about really getting the information about our brand. We all love to hear from AI about ourselves. The latest trend on LinkedIn, right? A couple of weeks back, everybody was posting about their photos on what AI knows about them. It really scratches that narcissistic itch. But then what about the whole thing on the organization? How much do you know about my organization? Not just one AI, but a council of AIs. And that starts to give us baseline on where does the organization stand from a comms lens. How do the key messages land? And then where's the fact versus fiction and what is made up? And how do we start going into how do we really double down our key messaging by looking at facts online? That's where the comms heart comes in, and then starting to look into credible claims around that and doubling down or tripling down on our key messaging. So it's a good first step in which we can start to look at AIO and start to get some accountability from it with some influence from us.
I really enjoy this persona of AI that we're creating, where we've gone from someone sort of stumbling into a party accidentally. We've got a boy growing into a man, and then we sort of have this nice, wise council imagery as well. I think it probably does hit all of those points at different stages. I think, Lisa, building on what Prashant has been talking about with visibility and messaging particularly, I'm curious as to what your view is on if AI becomes this sort of first reader, if it's press releases, statements, briefings, how you think that changes the way that people might communicate in those forums, and how it is that we sort of protect that level of human resonance or storytelling that has primarily always been human to human?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that if PR communications professionals are looking to have a large language model as their first audience, the one thing we know is that large language models like kind of data entities and structured information. But I would probably ask the AI, how do you want me to structure this? The AI will know. It'll probably give you a pretty succinct answer. But that's actually not what I'm seeing, interestingly, with the teams that I'm working with. So while the teams I'm working with are certainly using AI as like a first writer of press releases, as a first draft, they are using journalism and mainstream media as their kind of first audience. And the reason is that they have a kind of a line of sight and a level of accountability. So if they put a press release into the media and there's a factual error, or if they're unhappy with it, they can call the journalist. If they're unhappy with that, they can call the editor. If they're unhappy with what a large language model is spitting out, you've got no one to call. There's no kind of line of recourse for correction. So that's one thing. The second thing, and I really interested what Prashant was saying around reputation, is one of the organizations also that I was working with had a look at how all of the different LMMs were looking at their organization as a reputation. So, and they compared that with kind of previous measures of their reputation through mainstream media and more traditional measures. And what was interesting was it was quite negative. And initially, I was pretty surprised about that. But then, if you think about the kind of adversarial nature, as I was saying before, of that information environment, it's perhaps not surprising. I think the big question is, what do you do about it?
We actually have a little follow-up question for you, Lisa, from one of the earlier statements that you made, which I think was around the 3% of Australians being able to identify, was it like manipulated information? So I think just I would love to know a little bit more about if that's specifically about AI or if it's about, is that more of a disinformation stat and where it comes from. We love verifying information around here, so we would love a stat check.
That was from a fabulous Australian academic, Tanya Notley, who is doing a lot of work with misinformation. And it wasn't just AI, it was misinformation more broadly. And it was through a survey, and it was released last year. But the University of Western Sydney is doing some really great work, and the academic to follow is Dr. Tanya Notley.
Thank you for that. I think, the idea of data and information literacy is something that we've obviously talked about a lot with misinformation, but it doesn't actually seem to be continuing into this discussion about AI, which I think is a really, really important point to kind of keep it at the forefront as well. So, Nici, to come back to you for a minute. So, considering this discussion that we're having a little bit about how we think models might behave or ingest content, I'm curious how you navigate, I guess, governance in the type of work that you do. So if we're talking today about AI as a stakeholder and that relationship involves trust, can we truly treat AI this way if we're, using models that do feel a little bit like a black box? And I think speaking to that idea of a council that Prashant was talking about earlier, but this is a black box and it can feel a little murky in terms of data practices and privacy and some of those other issues.
Yeah. Look, I mean, okay, firstly, yes, it's a whole new brave world. There is a black box element to it. Even the people that build this don't understand exactly why it behaves in the way it does and what exactly it's doing. And we also have to remember that right now we still have an AI baby, which means it's still dependent on us. It's still looking to us for guidance. At some point, the baby's going to grow up and move out of home, and it's going to act like every teenager and be like, I don't need to listen to you. I know things that you don't. So when we get to that point, I think we're really going to double down on what trust means. The other side to this is what I believe is a bit of a hyper focus on trust in AI. So what I mean by this is let's just reframe it. You don't know how anybody else's brain works. Everybody else around us is a black box. I don't know why you behave in the way that you do. I can make assumptions based on my experience and the knowledge that I have and what I can deduce from this interaction. I actually can't see into your brain, and I can see less into your brain than I can see into the back end of a large language model. So it's a bit of an odd one to me. And I'm going to be a little bit harsh. I think we just kind of need to move on from that conversation. We don't have that talk about, can we trust the internet? We know we can't trust everything on the internet. That's why we teach ourselves critical thinking. We teach ourselves to verify information. We teach ourselves to have discussions with people that have different viewpoints from us. We teach ourselves to be able to reflect on our own behavior and understand what has driven us to that point and not take it for granted that that's just how it is. It's just more of that. We already have the skill set, okay? We already have this experience of humanity where we're trying to interpret what's real and what's not and how much to trust somebody based on their behavior. We now just need to apply that lens to AI. Where I think people trip up is, I often liken it to special effects. So I'm an 80s baby, and a really big key movie of my era was Jurassic Park. So 1994, Jurassic Park scared the bejeebers out of me, right? I could barely watch that first Velociraptor scene where they're in the cage. Now, I mean, it's been redone, but if you watch the original Jurassic Park, you're a bit like, oh, I can see the line in the Velociraptor's animatronic head that makes it swivel. It's less scary because I've had more exposure to this and I know what to trust and what not to. The reason why people get scared with trust with AI is because it's new and it looks very sexy and cool and sparkly. And we haven't really had a lot of experience at taking taking our rose-colored glasses off, of seeing through the special effects. So yes, there are trust issues. We have trust issues with everything. We're very clever. We're human. We've worked it out in a lot of scenarios. We will work it out with AI as well. It's just important to remind ourselves that up front, you can't believe everything it says. It's one version of the truth. I talk a lot about bias and stereotypes and misinformation. I literally have just come from giving a presentation in the office next door to me. I showed this picture where I was getting AI to do a picture of it was meant to be of me for a Forbes article I was in, for a concept for a photo shoot, and it just kept showing women with no top on every time I got AI to make an image, right? When we have this operating, it erodes our trust in these systems. But we have to remember we're in the driver's seat. I can ask for a different picture of a woman. It's just that AI might not offer that up first. So like with everything, we just need to remember, like when you're talking with a human, what they give back to you, their response, their behavior in that moment, there is a whole bunch of stuff happening underneath the surface, which you can only guess at. It's the same thing with AI. Whatever it presents to you is one version of whatever it could tell you in that given moment. It's up to you to provide that critical lens and actually go beneath the surface and think a bit more deeply about it. And I think that's a really cool invitation, because you get to be very innovative, you get to be very inquisitive, but we really have to rise to that challenge as humans.
I love that. I think that's such a good point. And this idea of a trust narrative is probably outweighing the ability for people to actually jump in and rectify that.
I will just add to that the people that trust it the least are the best people to be using it, because they're the people that have got heart and soul. So if you have a moral compass and you're very worried about what AI is going to do to humanity and trust and facts and information, you actually have to be the one that's involved. That's your call to action. I want you, come on in, because you are the moral compass that's going to raise the AI baby. Come on.
Love that. I think let's stay on this little thread of skepticism that sometimes comes through. And I think one of the beautiful things about communicators as an audience is that they're thoughtful and analytical and care deeply about all of the things that sit behind communication. So I would love to know a little bit more about how you navigate some of that internal friction when you're introducing AI as a new stakeholder in a workflow. How might you convince it might be a communications team, it might be a leadership team, that AI can be this effective partner rather than a replacement? And a little bit, we've had some questions come in the chat to know a little bit more about your own definition of ethical AI as well. It's for you, Nici.
Sorry, I'm just getting my mute button. I think when we have these concepts around ethical AI, I'm sorry, I was also looking at people's comments in the chat as well. So, but I think when my whole premise is on ethical AI, I think the tricky thing is it's very hard to prescribe what ethical AI is to anybody else, because it's ethics and it's morals, and I don't have a right to prescribe to you what ethical AI is. That's the really kind of murky territory. For me, when I go into organizations and advise them about this and where to start, it really starts with a conversation around what would good tech use look like for you and your people and your brand, right? And if we had the ultimate outcome, what would that deliver? And then also, what would it not do? What would it avoid? That becomes the basis of what this kind of ethical AI lens is. For me, it's about using tech in a way that causes the most amount of positive impact on the most people and causes the least amount of harm to your people, your brand, and your community and your clients. And it's thinking through that at every stage. And the best way to do this is just to remember that AI doesn't come with an agenda. So, AI doesn't have intent. It doesn't have your best interest at heart. So when we think about bringing this in as a stakeholder, when we think about AI ethics, again, coming back to that very human aspect, we've always had to deal and manage stakeholders where we can't control them and we don't exactly know what's going on with them. Again, it's not necessarily new territory. It's deciding what's important to us. And in that, when we interact with these tools as well, it's remembering that unlike humans, so when we interact with humans, they come to us, again, as Lisa said, with context. They come to us with some awareness and understanding. They might have worked in our industry. They might have, done particular training on what good communication looks like, good fact checking. You have to remember that AI is coming to you as like a Play-Doh of a human brain. It's algorithms' best attempt at modeling how human brains process and produce information. So in that lens, again, coming back to the baby concept, you have to teach it ethics. You have to teach it right from wrong. You have to be very explicit about what that means to you. You cannot assume that AI knows exactly any of the guidelines that you would expect a human to kind of have awareness of, because we've all assigned to this social agreement. So ethics is a really, really tricky one. I love it because it's like deeply interesting, but I'm always really careful not to prescribe ethical AI to other people, because you actually have to have that conversation as an organization, and it has to align with your company culture before you can kind of take that next step and put parameters around it.
I think that's really interesting. I think in the context of some of the other things that we will talk about around, potentially bias and the protection of local narratives and storytelling. And I think that's a key element of this as well. So Lisa, I'd really like to return a little to storytelling that we were touching on earlier. I guess at its heart, journalism, I'd say journalism and not so much media companies exactly, but journalism has always been about local voices. And if that sort of potential communication stakeholder of AI is, an offshore model, what might that mean for storytelling? How do you think that we could, if it's academics, if it's practitioners, if it's journalists themselves, like how could we best collaborate to kind of protect local narratives and storytelling?
Yeah, well, I think the first one is for local journalists and those that remain, is to actually use AI as a tool. We know that AI has got great applications in terms of what it can do with data. So in terms of all of the local courts that are now no longer reported on, you can use AI, you can go through kind of court reports, you can do a whole lot of investigative work that would have taken days and months that can now take kind of minutes and hours. So I think the first one is for newsrooms, and there is a lot of innovation happening. The problem is that the local newsrooms, they've just had this onslaught, wave after wave after wave of financial disruption to their economic models. And, this is probably the fourth, and a lot just can't adapt quickly enough. So I think, the Centre for Media Transition, they've got some really, for people who are interested, they're doing some really interesting research and got some good programs happening. There was the Guardian Hub and Spoke. So I think, what has come through that research is that local audiences want stories, not data. And I think, journalism is very good at that transition layer, and they want their journalists to be in their local communities. So I think the solutions for local journalism will actually come from the local communities, not from top down. But it's deeply challenged.
Is there anything that you're seeing, I guess, as a consensus in particularly the academic realms that you work in around what new models might look like from I guess a community journalism perspective, and how AI might feed that? I know you mentioned the kind of local democracy and that democracy AI things that have been invented by journalists, which is really effective. But is there sort of a common thread between those ideas?
Yeah, there's interesting. Some of the models look at, how can you find the economic efficiencies? So it's like, how can local journalists team up with metro newsrooms and they can share backends and all the expensive part of publishing journalism? There are some, kind of social first local journalism outfits that have been quite successful. There's nothing that has yet replaced just the volume of local journalism when we had newspapers. So, there are kind of some inklings of ideas that are starting to work, but I still think we're early days and it's got a long way to go.
Prashant, I would love for you to jump in here based on your experience in Southeast Asia, particularly. We've talked a lot about context in this conversation, and I think generalist AI often suffers from that context blindness that Nici's alluded to as well, but it doesn't necessarily understand why a message might work in Sydney but then doesn't land at all in Jakarta. So how are you navigating that level of like regional nuance without slowing down that constant desire for speed and efficiency that comes with AI?
Yeah, and that's where the push is, right? So generally speaking, everybody wants AI disclosure, right? Because it's the right thing to do, is placed to the next step of misinformation, disinformation. Great. But then if you disclose, are you getting more trustworthy? Or the inherent lack of trust actually becomes an excuse for the audiences to come and give it back to you. So disclosure may or may not be very useful all the time, and it goes back to how trustworthy the entity was, whether it's a company, whether it's a government, whether it's any other NGO, for example, or academia. So that's the trend that we are seeing. All the governments have come up with their own AI frameworks, whether it was just recently or whether it has been around for about a couple of years now. And AI is going big in budgets. Because Singapore's latest budget is the AI budget, because it has got good impact for the future of countries. At the same time, it also has got the GDP accelerating potential. So AI is here, disclosure also has to be here, but then trust has been fractured long back. And when you disclose, then it goes back to the inherent trust of the entity. So when we look at this, we started to look into different kinds of frameworks. So we came up with our own framework, but we simplified it. So we called it just 3Ps framework. We essentially look at very simply. We would say that, okay, if you are disclosing that you have used AI, let's say in advertising or let's say in research, you have to firstly talk about the purpose of it. Why did you use it? Oh, because I could reach out to my audiences with personalized ads that they care about. Or I could analyze 1 million data points in a matter of one day with all the transparency that's out there. So the purpose is important, that I had to analyze a lot of work, or I had to communicate with a lot of people in their own way. So people understand that you have to use AI for it. Second becomes the proof. Bring receipts to the table, because that will also bring trust, rather than just put a caveat like an insurance company. This ad was generated by AI, because that is essentially what people need to get provoked. So the proof is very important, that you need to show receipts over there, whether it's access to your backend on research or whether it's about how your advertising is done. And the third one becomes about the people itself. So the purpose, the proof, and the people. For who did you do it? Reaching out to communities that are hard to access, or really putting up quick data on all the conversations that are happening back to the publics. So this framework really works because we have to work with the tide, which is all about disclosures. Government are going at it, and we as entities have to work with it. But at the same time, if you work with 3Ps, then it really works well in a more AI-friendly way.
Have you seen any examples where that level of transparency or disclosure has backfired, or is that proving to be like the most effective tactic?
Oh, it has backfired big time. Whenever there's simmering distrust, it would, right? So Coke ads Christmas. Corporates at that time, that was a big AI wave of job displacement. Coke, a big corporate client, right? And Christmas ad. So we have seen what happens when you generate an AI ad. And it was not just Coke, it was many other companies that were doing it, right? So we have had fair share of that disclosure and how it has backfired. While great brands, so it's not like the brands are not most loved, but the conundrum here speaks to the simmering mistrust against of people. Same thing happened with the Andy Byron incident with Coldplay, the CEO that was caught, right? Like fake apologies, so on and so forth. But we also see good stuff here. For example, we see that CEOs who are coming out with saying that, look, we are using AI in a friendly way to really power through some of the important innovations that we want to bring to our clients or publics. Public does understand that AI is the new search. Everybody will stop going to library, or a lot of people, they will Google search, and similarly people will do AI. It gets baked into the system. It's all about how trustworthy the base entity was at that time.
Yeah, and can I just add to that as well, just to like put in my 2 cents and agree with that, is I always advise companies, err on the side of transparency, and also to engage your stakeholders in the what's in it for them. So again, this kind of comes down to brand and company culture. But for me, it's kind of like, well, if you're just using AI to do more for the sake of more, that's a hard sell. Whereas if you are doing AI to deliver a better product or a better experience, or to free your people up to do something that's more innovative or creative or creates more connection, then people, kind of understand it. And I work a lot with lots of different companies, but one of the industries where there's a lot of stakeholder engagement is schools. And I work a lot with schools because 20% of Australian adults have had any sort of formal training in AI, which means when teachers start using it in classrooms, those kids are going home and engaging with their stakeholders, their parents, and mentioning that schools are now teaching them AI. And there are lots of different feelings and sentiments around how worthy that is. Teachers are trying to escape their job, they're cheating, I don't want my kid to learn this, is it safe? It's all the same worries that we see coming up in the general population, but it's really concentrated when you have minors that people really love and care about in the form of their children. And what we do in that scenario is we hold P&C nights before we even introduce AI to the children, to inform parents about what's in it for them. And we use data to show them what are the outcomes when we do expose kids to this technology. Does it make their learning better? Does it help them feel more supported? Does it let us catch learning behavior issues earlier on? When you show the uplift from it, then it really starts to give that traction. And then when you show, okay, and now we're going to save this time and resources, and here's how we're going to spend those time and those resources and that extra revenue, that also kind of closes the loop. It's not, I don't know if people saw, like, Woolworths are bringing out agentic AI to pre-fill your shopping cart, right? And the potential issue there is like, well, whose products do they push? If you have transparency over, this is how the model works, this is what it's designed to do, this is how it's going to help you, and if you want to opt out, here it is, that all of a sudden buys a lot more consumer trust than just, hey, we've got Olive filling up your cart with whatever we've chosen for you. So that's a really important piece of it. Do not take for granted how little awareness there is around what AI is, what it does do, what it doesn't do, all the scary myths out there. That is happening in your audience base as well as right in your office. It's really important to manage that process as well and bring people along on the journey.
Yeah, I think that's such a crucial point, is that people often just stop at the disclosure of we used AI, but not going that step further and explaining the how and the why of it. Nici, I'm curious if in what you've been describing around how you sort of land that narrative around transparency, have you had any instances where you've had like some resistance to that, or people not necessarily quite getting on board, or it's been a slightly harder pitch for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so yeah, like you said, I've done over 200 talks. A good portion of those are workshops in large organizations. And we survey every organization before we walk in to kind of know where everybody's at. And you always have a small portion of people that have never touched generative AI, have no interest in it, think it's the worst thing that we've ever done, are really anti it. And then you've got a lot of people in the middle, and then a few people that are super keen, can't even remember how their brain worked beforehand, including me, right? And in those scenarios, I guess I always start by saying it's not my job to convince you that AI is the best thing and that you have to use it for everything. It's my job to make you feel empowered to make a choice about when and if you use it, and to feel good about how you use it. That is something that immediately kind of alleviates people's resistance. I'm not shoving it down your throat, and the world isn't shoving it down your throat either. It's a tool that's there. Like, you can still choose to have a smartphone, you can still choose to use a computer. It's hard to do things without it, but you can still function as a human, and we still have that choice. But it's about feeling like we're allowed to make the choice in how we engage with it. The other part is acknowledging that our human brains are not made for this rate of change. So the fact that we are overwhelmed is a biological response to that. We, as physical entities that are made of flesh and blood, cannot fire our neurons fast enough to adapt to how AI is progressing. The other thing, once you acknowledge all of that and you acknowledge that it's normal to be scared, is to actually solve people's real problems. It seems really straightforward, but the amount of organizations that I see starting new shiny object projects because they've got AI, instead of, can we help you manage your meeting notes, is really, really big. So just understand what your people's actual problems are. Find something that they do on a repetitive basis. Find something that does not bring them joy. Find something that is not going to hurt customers or clients if it goes wrong. It's in really boring stuff, by the way, spoiler alert. It's the most boring, repetitive stuff. But if you can alleviate that for someone and solve a real problem, you often can just give them that piece of like hope that, hey, I'm still important to this process. They still need my human brain, but it's just made my life a little bit easier or a little bit better. I had a workshop the other day where I'd been working with an organization for an entire year, and I got to the end of the year and this woman came up to me and she goes, I just wanted to tell you that when you first came, I only listened to the first 10 minutes of you talking because I decided I hated AI and I didn't want to hear anything that you had to teach me, which I was like, fair call, that's fine. But then she said, but somebody else that was in these workshops, they learnt how to solve one of their problems with AI. And I was having the same problem and I was spending 3 weeks and my boss was putting red lines all through it and I just couldn't get it. And she came and sat next to me and showed me how she used AI to solve this particular problem. And then she was like, and now it's 3 minutes and I do it perfectly. It's the only thing that she admitted that she'll ever do with AI is this one task. But she was like so empowered by the fact that it was really useful to her. A colleague had showed her, she now had solved an actual problem and she realized what the benefit might be in engaging in it. So it seems really straightforward, but acknowledge that it's totally normal to be scared. Acknowledge that we're all overwhelmed. We're all finding out this stuff at the same time as everybody else. Solve actual real problems and just keep the conversation going. It's not a one and done. You cannot have one workshop on AI and call it a day. You cannot buy everyone a Copilot subscription and call it a day. Come back to it. I used to have these AI playground hours with my staff when I was still working in academia. 2 p.m. on Thursdays, everyone's encouraged to use a large language model to do their work. Every second staff meeting, somebody shared something that they did, whether it worked, whether it had failed. We just shared those experiences, and that starts to normalize the process. It's new tech, it's a new way of working. It's not normal until it becomes normal, and that becoming normal is scary for people, and that's okay as well.
I think what you've just done there is also illustrate the really important role of internal comms with a lot of this stuff and how it sort of supports and empowers people and turns them into the evangelists that you're describing as well, which is, I think, another crucial point to this discussion. Lisa, we've had a comment in the chat for you. So people are a little bit interested in, I guess, the role and the value that media can have in this environment, given that trust in media is dropping and media themselves are using AI more, obviously in part due to some of what we were talking about with fewer staff and economic challenges. So do you have any, I guess, future thoughts on how do we navigate that kind of push-pull of trust between media and AI?
Yeah, I think trust is the big issue. And I think one thing that we haven't really grappled with yet is as our information environment changes, it is also changing us. And that's not just me saying it. There are academics who have kind of done a lot of work looking at how we now arrive at our pathways to truth, which used to be through kind of fact-based evidence pathways or traditional kind of academic pathways. But we're now adopting more of like an authentic self-belief. I believe it. And therefore, if I actually challenge somebody who has arrived at truth through this authentic self-belief, I'm actually offending their belief systems. And so this has really big implications for kind of splintering of organizations, society. I think it's something that we have to be mindful of. I think the trust thing is big. But whoever asked that question are dead right. Journalism is also, suffering a massive decline in trust. And I think, hopefully there might be a little bit of a shakeout in terms of what AI does is replace, a whole lot of just the kind of, the path, just the kind of conversational kind of journalism that was trying to just game an algorithm, the clickbait, the rage bait. So we might, see a little bit of a leveling out. The one conversation that I did have with a news editor the other day about AI, she said, oh, look, I love AI and I hate AI. And I think that, you're going to see the kind of smart newsrooms really adopt AI, and you're seeing it in the UK. I think Full Fact in the UK is doing a brilliant job with AI, in a way that is doubling down on how to be that kind of verification layer on our information system. Where you will see it not, kind of engender trust is where it goes to kind of writing, just kind of puff pieces that are there to feed algorithms and get clicks. That's, very top level, but ultimately I'm optimistic. If journalism can survive the economic disruption, I think it's got a real role to play.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. I think I want to pick up on this idea of what you were saying around sort of, feeding an algorithm and puff pieces. So, Prashant, as someone that analyzes communications primarily, what do you think about the quality of communication with the introduction of AI? Are we seeing improvements in quality and efficiency, or are we just sort of ending up in potentially a lot more noise or people trying to fit a brief that they might not quite understand yet?
Yeah, I would say good slop and bad slop because, like as communicators, right? I love Punch the Monkey's AI version on TikTok. Good slop. I hate AI journalist. So it's the same thing happening. It's just that the range has increased, lots of content on the back end of things, adding to the noise, and actually not being picked up by AI engines because they understand it's something that is not helpful from a citation perspective. So the sea of content will only increase. It's going to be all the same content, but it's going to be ignored. So more so, we will have to stop worrying about the quality decrease or the bad slop, because at the end of the day, it will get ignored. We all AI has sensors in terms of what to cite and what not to. Yes, we have to manage it, and we also have got noses to see what AI smells like or what it talks like, right? So I'm not too worried about the sea of sameness here. I'm more thinking about does it really help the intent and the insight? Because if it really gives that superpowers to the good communicators and to the good insights professionals, so on and so forth. But it's just that they have to embrace it, they have to use and think about it, and that's why they have to have the paper before the AI or paper before the agent. Because it's so smart, especially the agents, that you can go down a rabbit hole and then you can just go through it and waste all your time. That's the peril of intelligence, that intelligent people also tend to get lost in the sea of intelligence. So it's a lot about that, okay, if you have the strategy done or what you want or what insight you want, you start with the paper and go to the agent. The good AI slop will only help you get your results faster.
Yeah, I love the idea of, good slop and bad slop. And, hopefully we will all get to the point that is much easier to identify, and we can find our own sources of truth in that context as well. I'm quite conscious that I think particularly Lisa, I feel like I've asked you questions that are all a little bit challenging about AI, and I haven't necessarily given you space to talk about what it is that you are excited about with the opportunity of AI, what you see as being really heartening, what you're excited about, what you're curious about. I would love to hear that from you, so that we don't only stay in sort of sad trust media economic.
The doom. Look, I think there's, with this huge disruption comes huge opportunity, and especially, comms, PR, marketing, corporate affairs, even risk, a little bit of cyber. You are all right in the center of this. And so like now is the time to upskill and innovate. You've got a real opportunity to kind of redefine your roles. What I see in the short term is every organization is going to need an information intelligence unit. So it's no longer enough to be able to kind of looking at sentiment analysis and posting out on social media. You need to have a really kind of broad view and a capability to look at the entire information landscape. And that'll enable you to make better judgments and better decisions. So that I'm really excited about. The other thing that I'm really excited about is I think this does come down to trust, actually. Like every business transaction, Every relationship, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, you want to have trust with the people that you're trying to communicate with. And that is under challenge. And I think we're going to have to kind of, read widely, think deeply, and move forward very thoughtfully here. It requires a bit of a step back at the same time. We need to be thinking fast and slow right now. So I, look forward to actually, if we can survive the immediate harms, and I think we will, then how do we, move through this and really start thinking differently about how we maintain trust in our kind of information environment?
Love that. We are starting to run up on time a little bit, which is a shame because I would be so happy to keep this conversation just going on for hours for the poor panelists. But I think I would really love to close us out with something a little bit practical and tactical for everyone on the call. So for each of you, I would love to understand what it is that you would recommend communicators stop and start doing right now when they're thinking about or using AI. So Lisa, we might start with you, and then Prashant, and then close out with Nici before we summarize what we've learned.
Oh gosh, I would say stop thinking AI just will do everything faster. Facts matter more than just words. Start thinking really carefully about a strategic application of AI that builds trust instead of breaks it.
I would say think about what you want to amplify, because if you have not thought about your strategy, what you want to really deep down go back and amplify, whether it's inside communication or whatnot, the wrong things will get amplified. And that's going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, I would think stop thinking about it as a tool. It's not an add-on. The decision is not Copilot versus ChatGPT. Start thinking about it as infrastructure and a collaborator. Stop thinking about it as something that just helps you rewrite an email or check a fact, and start thinking about it like a clever intern that's desperate to help you but actually has no idea about what you do or what good looks like for you. And stop thinking that it's going to go away, or that just because it's not fantastic all the time, it means that it's not worthwhile. Start thinking this is the new way of being, and we're just the messy cohort of adults that have to live through it. But it also is an invitation to shape it. And I think that we can all, if we do it right, look back on this moment and be very proud of how we engage, especially in an Australian context, especially in an industry as powerful as communications. You not only get to shape it for you, you also have a responsibility to shape the public's perception of what this tech is and how they should engage with it. And that is a wildly, insanely inviting opportunity.
Thank you. That's brilliant. I have learned so much today. I really enough for having this conversation with me. There were a ton of questions that we didn't get to, which I did think might be the case. So we will work through them and work out the best place to publish the answers for everyone to see. We also had a bit come in around how we start looking at the sentiment of LLM responses, which is something that we are actively working on at Isentia. So we will have more to share for you on that soon. If you enjoyed the session today, be sure to sign up for the Isentia newsletter. The instructions for this will be sent through with the webinar recording. And keep an eye out for our next webinar in this series, which should be winging your way after Easter. There is some free resources up on your screen now, courtesy of Nici. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure everyone will be poring over those after hearing you speak today. But thank you for joining us, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.